Chapter 20 is on community ecology. Chapter 20, Section 1 discusses species interactions. There are 5 major types that we'll be looking at: predation, competition, parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. Predation refers to one species benefiting, which is the predator, and then the other species is going to get eaten. So that one is the prey. So there are certain adaptations that organisms will develop in order to try to reduce their chances of getting eaten. One of those could be mimicry, another could be secondary compounds, and the last one could be physical abilities. For instance, rattlesnakes have a very good sense of smell, and they have heat-sensitive pits on the tip of their face, which helps them to strike their prey in the dark. It could also be things like having camouflage or very sharp teeth, things like that. Thorns, okay, those would help protect plants, so that would be a physical ability. Mimicry, we're talking about a harmless species resembling a poisonous or distasteful species. So for instance, the milk snake resembles the poisonous coral snake. So the milk snake itself is not poisonous, but because it looks like a poisonous species, predators tend to avoid it. And then secondary chemicals are either poisonous or bad-tasting chemicals metabolized from a plant, and they could be things like poison ivy or poison oak. And if you've ever got one of those, that the rash is very itchy, and there's consequences for touching it. So that helps to deter organisms from coming in contact with those types of organisms. Competition is caused when species have a niche overlap. So that can cause one of 3 things happening: competitive exclusion, character displacement, or resource partitioning. Competitive exclusion refers to the elimination of one species due to the competition for that same resource. So in this example here, there's these 2 barnacle species, and both of them want to live along the sides of the cliff here. You can see this is where the water would come in. At high tide, it would go up higher. And this darker species has forced the lighter species to only live at the top part of the cliff here. So they've kind of excluded them from a certain part of that habitat. So that would be competitive exclusion. With character displacement, you're going to have an anatomical change that actually will reduce the species competition. So, for instance, Darwin's finches, which we've mentioned before, their beaks changed so that they were able to feed on different sources and then basically divvy up the resources instead of outcompeting one another. And with resource partitioning, that's where species are going to share their resources. So warbler feeding, they talk about this in your textbook. They are a type of bird that will feed in different parts of a fir tree. So some will feed at the bottom part of the tree, some will feed in the middle part, some will feed at the top. And they stay within their areas. We looked at different types of lizard species before, and how some of them live in the small shrubbery, some of them will live up in the trees, and so on. So they divide up the spaces where they're going to be catching their prey. Symbiosis refers to the relationship between different species living in close contact with each other. There's 3 types we're going to look at: parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism. With parasitism, that's when one species benefits, that's going to be the parasite, and the other species is harmed, that's the host. So there are 2 types of parasites. You could have ectoparasites, which are external, like fleas, ticks, leeches, and then there's also endoparasites, which are inside, and a lot of different types of worms, tapeworms, ringworms, that sort of thing. Those would be endoparasites. They live inside an organism. And the main difference between predator-prey relationship and parasite-host is that the parasite generally doesn't try to kill the host, at least right away. Unlike the predator and prey relationship, the predator just tries to kill the prey. Here, the parasite wants the host to live so that they can continue to feed on it. If they kill their host, then they're going to have to find a new one. Mutualism is when you have a relationship that both species benefit from each other. One of the most important ones on Earth is the relationship between pollinators and plants. So the pollinator, bird or insect, would get food from the plant, and then the plant would then get pollinated. And the other picture here, we've got a clownfish that will feed on small invertebrates that could harm the sea anemone that it lives next to. And their fecal matter actually provides nutrients to the anemone. And the anemone also provides some camouflage for the clownfish. So they have a mutually beneficial relationship. And then commensalism refers to one species benefiting while the other is not affected. So the example we have here are cattle egrets, which are these little white birds, and Cape buffalo. The egrets just kind of perch on the top of the buffalo, which doesn't hurt the buffalo any. They're very light. And when the buffalo move, they stir up the little lizards and insects and things that live in the grass and make them scatter away, and then the birds can dive down and catch their prey.